Folks, I'm going to start recording, and I'm going to ask everybody if you can turn off your videos. I might be able to do it as well if you forget how to do it.
Yeah.
It just looks and works out better that way. Except for Michael and Anne. Michael, you have to unmute yourselves.
How about that?
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, excellent. Okay, let's get this going.
Okay.
And I think you can see that, can you?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Good evening, everyone. That was quite interesting, the echo effect there. We hope that the reverb doesn't continue all through the program.
It's perfect now. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. We were in Galapagos in 2009, so it's not that recently, but I'm sure that most of the things that we saw are pretty much the same as at the time. We left very early in January. I can't remember the exact time. And usually when you go there, you have to land in Quito, which is high enough up that it's a bit of a struggle for altitude sickness, but nonetheless, there you are in Ecuador. And the Galapagos is actually a province of Ecuador's. So usually you go from Quito down to an airport in the southwestern part of Ecuador, and then from there straight to the Galapagos. The Galapagos is almost 1,000 kilometers off the coast of South America and has a population about similar to Labrador, about just over 30,000 people. It's not a huge population, but the islands are pretty small. If you put Newfoundland on top of them, it covers the whole area pretty nicely. That, I hope, gives you just an idea of the scale of the islands. And usually you have to visit with a group. It's very hard to get around if you're not with a group and to get permission to land on the islands. Because it is all a national park, exactly. Just speak up, Anne. The Galapagos is there because it's on the edge of one of the tectonic plates, these big plates of rock that cover the face of the earth and sort of move against each other and underneath and over each other and cause all the earthquakes and volcanoes and that sort of tectonic activity that we experience. The ring around the Pacific Ocean is called the Ring of Fire because it is so active, both from the point of view of volcanoes and earth movements, earthquakes of various sorts. And the Galapagos is, as we said, just off the west coast of South America, and is one of the active parts of that plate. Here again, you can see the South America, you can see the Galapagos, and we'll zoom in a little bit, and all of those little cones, those little black cones, mark volcanoes, volcanic activity in that area over the years. And that's not all of them. That's just to say that that is a very active area. So, to the Galapagos. The islands are sort of out in the middle of nowhere, and for a long time people tried to figure out what got them there. And the geologists have figured out that there's a hot spot, a bleb of really hot mantle just below the crust in that area, and that sometimes lava works its way through the crust and up onto the surface and comes out as volcanic eruptions. So mostly basalts and things like that. And that builds up quite large volcanic islands. But because this site is on a tectonic plate that's moving, and the plate is actually sliding over the top of the hot spot, here we go, a bit of volcanic activity. We'll take a closer look at the islands here. So the hot spot now is right under this part of the Galapagos. And you can see there are a series of volcanic craters just underneath it. But the islands that were there before are the ones down to the southeast. The smaller islands to the southeast were originated over the hot spot. They were volcanic islands. The heat of the volcanic activity underneath them caused the magma to come out, but also the land to rise somewhat in that area. But over the years, they've moved slightly towards the southeast from away from the hot spot, and they've cooled down and they've eroded. So they're now very low, almost flat islands. And this is really important in figuring out what can live where in the Galapagos. Whereas the islands right over the hot spot, so Fernandina and Isabella Islands, they have numerous active volcanoes on them. They have all of the very frequent eruptions, and they're the highest land because there has been very little erosion. The most recent volcanic activity was I think it was recently as the 80s. So the youngest islands, the ones right over the hot spot, have the active volcanoes, they have the high peaks, and they're relatively moist. Whereas the oldest islands, the ones up to the southeast, they have inactive volcanoes, so there's no real volcanic activity going there at all, and they tend to be very low, pretty well flat, and very dry. And here's another way of looking at that. The hot spot is on the left-hand side, so an island forms in number one at the top. Then the plate beneath it continues moving a little bit off, in this case to the right. That island that formed, number one, starts to erode and wash away into the sea, and another volcanic island forms behind it, and so on and so on. So you have a chain of islands all moving more or less in the same direction, with the younger ones over the hot spot and the older ones farther away. So that has all happened in about the last 5 million years, which isn't a very long time. But this gives you an idea of just how active those volcanoes are on the Galapagos Islands. In 270 years, this is a list of, I'm not sure it's not all, but certainly most of the earthquakes during that period. It's quite astonishing for such a small area. As Anne mentioned, the area around the Galapagos is a national park and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and is world famous because, well, mostly because of the work that Darwin did in, not so much on the Galapagos, but through his entire trip, pulling together evidence for his theory of evolution. And the Galapagos became sort of a centerpiece because it has such a wonderful array of peculiar plants and animals. And now people are beginning to understand why it's so interesting, why they're so strange. And we'll get to that as we go on through the program. So here are the, as we said, the areas in national park. These are the official designations for the two parts of the Galapagos. And then the World Heritage Site includes both of those. When you land in the Galapagos, there's only one airport. It's on a tiny little island called Baltra, and it's a pretty blasted looking island. It used to have interesting tortoises, but it was used as an airbase by the Americans during the Second World War, and they were unfortunately used as target practice. At least that's the local story, so they no longer exist. But there are still giant tortoises and other interesting wildlife throughout the rest of the Galapagos. From the airfield, you you take a bus and then a ferry ride, or a ferry ride and then a bus. So maybe it's anyway, one way or another, you get to the other side of Santa Cruz Island. And Santa Cruz is quite a large island, about 40 somewhat kilometers across. And it shows why the height of the island is so important. You start off driving on a very low, dry plain, and then you start to ascend a hill, and everything becomes quite moist, and there's a lush vegetation. Everything is green and very fresh looking because of pretty constant moisture. And so this is only 10, 15 kilometers from where you started, but it's a very, very different climatic area from the low plain. So you can see there's almost a low forest everywhere. There are a few farms that have been cut into the forest. The hills in the center of Santa Cruz get up to about 850 meters. And that's high enough that it actually creates the moisture that you experience as you drive across the island. Warm, moist air that's about air over the Pacific that has got moisture from evaporation from the surface of the Pacific gets blown towards the islands. It's forced to rise up and over the hills on the islands, and that cools the air down, and that causes condensation, and that causes rain on the windward side of the island. That's what we experienced in that bus trip. We started off in the dry, low plain. It wasn't high enough to cool the air and cause condensation. We went up the hill, we came into the rain area at the top of the hill, and then down onto the dry southern side of the island. There are lots of interesting plants in the Galapagos, and many of them are endemic, which is really quite fascinating, just like the animals themselves. This is a passion fruit with very peculiar bracts around its buds, these beautiful, fuzzy, gland-covered bracts. There, I can't get that out of the way. I've got something in front of the screen here that's causing me trouble. There we go. There's also this pearlberry that's in the dogbane family. A really miserable little plant that's actually quite widespread, but you find in different parts of the Galapagos puncture plant. It looks a little bit like a buttercup, but you don't want to step on it. It's not that the plant has spines itself, it's that its fruit is really hideous, hideously pointed. And because of the shape of the fruit, when it falls into the ground, the spines are always up. So if you step on one, you're going to have to pull it out of your shoe, and you don't step on one barefoot. A peculiar plant called red spiderling with very tiny flowers that's in the 4 o'clock family. I don't know if anyone's grown 4 o'clocks. They get quite tall, and they have very colorful magenta, white, or striped flowers, beautifully scented. And they call 4 o'clock because they flower late in the day and then they close as night comes on. But this little thing has almost microscopic flowers and no noticeable scent at all. There's another one with even smaller flowers in the same family. Very peculiar thing. There are lots of plants in the Boraginaceae, the forget-me-not family, and they have that characteristic curl to the end of the flowering stems, the uncurling buds that flower from the base towards the tip. Oh yeah, and because of the size, the shape of the leaves, this one's called lingua de ternera, calf tongue in Spanish, which is kind of funny. There are 4 different kinds of mangroves on the island: black mangrove, or not on the islands, not on the island, white mangrove, button mangrove, and red mangrove, which we'll come to later on. This is another member of the borage family. This is one that the finches feed on. They really like the seeds. Anyway, we'll get to a few more plants. We're going to explore underneath the plants for a bit. Because these are volcanic islands, they have some rather interesting features, including things like lava tubes, and really big lava tubes. Lava tubes are caused by hot lava flowing down gentle hills, gentle slopes, and cooling up at the surface so that the top of the flow becomes rock hard, but that rock then insulates the lava beneath it, which continues to flow downhill. And because it's quite sticky lava, it actually pulls the lava behind it down until it flows out at the ocean side and leaves the hollow tube behind. It's kind of like water or something stickier than water flowing through a straw and leaving the straw empty afterwards. And as I say, these lava tubes can get really big. And they were actually used as hideouts and places to keep animals and all sorts of strange things in the past. Now they're merely tourist attractions. On the island of Santa Cruz, the largest town is Puerto Ayora, and that's where most people's trips begin. It's a small town. It has lots of shops and stores, as you'd expect for a tourist town, and a lot of introduced species, such as the flame tree, African flame tree, which is very colorful or flamboyant, yeah. Very colorful, but can be invasive in places. Also bougainvillea and things like that. And certainly introduced species have become a real problem throughout the Galapagos, both animal and plant. This is the harbor. You can see almost all the boats in the harbor are cruise boats that take people out to the various islands. This is not really a fishing harbor. Although there are a small number of fishing boats, this it really is the tourism capital. You can see how dry it is from the cacti on the far bank. We're now down on the dry side of the island, and it's essentially desert in many places. So you get out to a boat. There are all sorts of shapes and sizes of boats, from little ones to something that you'd expect around in the 1800s, more in the 1800s than now. And you do have to, as we said earlier, go with a tour group on one of these boats, because you're not allowed to stay on the islands. You have to visit with a guide who's licensed by the government. And all of these boats are given very specific times and places that they have to visit, and periods that they can be on various islands. There's also a long list of things that you as a visitor are allowed to do and not do. You're not allowed to touch animals. You're not allowed to feed them or even bring food onto any of the islands. So it's a great way, in theory, of protecting the animals and plants from the tourism that's being imposed on them. This is the guy that we went with. He was apparently an ex-Army SEAL, interesting fellow. The regulations for guides are also pretty specific. They do have to do at least 120 days worth of guiding per year just to maintain their licenses. One of the places we visited was a mangrove swamp. This is a red mangrove in this case, the one with the big seeds that have large roots that grow on them while they're still on the tree and then plunge into the mucky soil beneath. And sorry, the photographs aren't great here because this was low light and things were moving around quite a bit. But this mangrove swamp was a breeding ground for many of the reef sharks, particularly the black tip and white tip reef sharks. The young would feed in these mangroves until they got big enough to go out into open water and avoid larger predators. What was also fascinating was that there were sea turtles moving around all through these mangrove swamps. And they seemed to be looking around, whoops, what happened there? Looking around underwater and looking around above water and just seeing what was going on. But then every now and then they go into the trees and start chewing. And it sounded just like a beaver. And apparently they actually eat the bark, the cambium, the live tissue beneath the bark at the base of mangrove trees. It's something I had never heard of before. But these mangroves were alive with all sorts of interesting animal life. So this is the boat that we took, and we were on it for, the whole trip was 10 days. So I think it's 8 days on the boat. And we visited a whole series of different islands. So I said, the boats can only drop people off at certain times in certain places. And so you see them sometimes waiting in the little harbors for their turn to put their people aboard and as another boat loads. You have to follow the trails, the very well marked trails. You're not allowed to leave them. If you do leave them and your guide doesn't get you back, the guide can lose their license, which is, again, very interesting. That kind of puts the onus on them. So even though there is a huge amount of tourist activity on these islands, they are trying very hard to reduce the effect that it has on wildlife populations. In the wetter parts of the islands, there's a peculiar tree that's in the daisy family, the Asteraceae. It's called, actually, several different species of Scalecia. They can get quite tall, and they don't look a whole lot like a daisy from the ground. But if you get to see some of the seedlings, the shorter plants, such as this different species here, the hairy Scalecia, and see the flowers, that's where the family resemblance really shows. Number of things that we've not run into before. This plant called leatherleaf, not at all related to ours. It's in the same family as Euonymus. And several different species of Alternanthera, which are amaranths. So related to Prince's Plume and some of those other garden plants, and some of the, quinoa is an amaranth as well. Another member of the amaranth group. This is a amaranth family. This one actually doesn't have anything in the way of leaves, just has stems as a way of reducing the amount of water loss. Glory bower is a peculiar thing. It was thought to be in the Valerianaceae, but now it's been put into the Laniaceae, so the mint family, which is quite fascinating. It does not look at all like a mint to me, but there you go. This is a member of the Portulaca, Portulaca. Mesembryanthemum, we used to be called Mesembryanthemum, now Isoaceae, very fleshy leaves. It's another member of that group. Oh, ice plants are in the Isoaceae. One of the real problems with traveling in the Galapagos is finding information about the plants when you want it. You didn't say anything about that, right? What do you want to say? Palo Santo, a holy tree, incense tree. I'm not sure. I really don't know very much about this one, so I'm not that sure I can say anything. Do you?
Okay. They are deciduous, right?
Most of these are, exactly, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting. That also compounds the difficulty sometimes of identifying things.
And you can see why they're deciduous. So the plant in the background is a huge cactus. So as the dry season comes on, there's no water available to any of these leafy plants. And if they were not deciduous, they'd be transpiring. They'd be losing water very rapidly. So like in our winter, when they can't keep their leaves, here it's in the dry season that they have to lose them. Throughout the forest on some of the islands, we were finding these peculiar traps. They're bait traps for wasps that have been unfortunately introduced to the islands by mistake. I don't know how they got there, but they have a whole series of wasps that are replacing or causing problems for local wasp and bee populations, the wild species. So they're putting out these bait traps to try to keep them down. Now we're going to a slightly drier location. It's along shore. This is another member of the aster family. Looks almost like a marigold in some ways, but very, very fleshy leaves. There are also lichens on rocks and on tree branches. And in some places, the lichens are really, really thick because they're getting enough moisture from, as we talked about when we did talk about Peru, they're getting enough moisture coming in the form of moist air from the sea that it can keep the lichens alive, even where there's not much water for any other plants. Then even the name of the islands is based on the tortoises that are there. And it was the tortoises that really caught people's imaginations just because they're so huge, and also because they were considered to be a wonderful food source for sailors at one time. And many of those tortoises were taken, pulled onto boats, strapped in the hold upside down so they couldn't move around, and then cooked during long voyages for sailors who had no other form of meat available. So unfortunately, the islands, the Galapagos Islands, were depopulated over a couple of centuries, almost entirely depopulated of their giant tortoises. However, about 15,000 still exist, and 2 of the 15 original taxa are extinct, but the rest are still, even though in very small numbers, still extant. Here's some of the shells of these giant tortoises, and to give you an idea of the size, here's a person who actually got into one of them, and doesn't look a whole lot different from the original occupant. I mean, it does, but doesn't. I mean, as far as size is concerned, it really is quite astonishing that they are that large, almost up to 1,000 pounds. The tortoises are primarily grazers. They probably will take the occasional small bird or egg and things like that if they can come across it. But for the most part, they graze on vegetation. And they have different shell shapes based on where they live and what the conditions are. So this is the Santa Cruz tortoise. It's a low rounded shell. There's not much of a notch above the head, so this animal can't reach up very high. They're kind of like tanks. They sort of where they want, if they want to go somewhere, don't stand in the way. They're coming through, and they can get function just as well in the water as they can on land pretty well. The dung is quite spectacularly large. It's almost the size of bear dung. It really is massive, but it's entirely vegetation. Just grass bits, partially digested. They don't have, they're not like ruminants. They can get very little food out of the material that they eat. So they have to eat a lot of vegetation in the course of a day. So we're saying the shell shapes are different from island to island. And here are the 3 main shell shapes. The one that we looked at first is in the lower right, the Santa Cruz tortoise. And then the saddleback tortoise on the left-hand side is the tortoise that is living on the driest island and has the highest notch at the above its head in the shell. That allows these tortoises with the saddleback shells to reach up. Oh, there, got some pointers here. To reach their heads up much higher to feed on low branches and leaves and fruit and so on than any of the other tortoises. So on islands where there's very little food around, they would be at a great advantage. Lonesome George, this particular tortoise, is the last of his kind, was the last of his kind. He was found on Pinta Island, and he lived the last years of his life in a tortoise rehabilitation or a tortoise raising facility with the hopes that they could mate him with another tortoise. They never did find one of the same species. They hoped very much that they could mate him with another, and at least get a hybrid that they could try doing backbreeding with. But he died, as far as I know, without offspring. It died in 2012, so just a short while after we were there. Doesn't look very happy in this picture. Oops. In this breeding facility, they had a whole series of tortoises that you could get a close look at. They were very accustomed to seeing people. And again, you weren't allowed to touch them. They were allowed to come up and touch you if that was okay with them, but you were not allowed to touch or feed them or get in their way in any way. They did have offspring from some of the other tortoises, and they had a whole series of them that they actually marked so that they could release them. You can see the number on the back. And that way they could follow them from year to year and see how well they were doing. We also went to the capital of the province of the Galapagos province. It's called Puerto Banquerizo Moreno, and it's not quite as large as well, the other town, and but it is actually the capital, and has that's where the tortoise rearing facility was. It's peculiar in that everywhere downtown, you sort of step over and around sea lions. They come into the harbor. There's a large colony of them there, and they pretty well lie where they want and do what they want, and you work your way around them. Again, nobody's allowed to molest them. Here you can see the tour boats out further out in the harbor, but the local fishermen have their boats in closer to land. There are strict rules about about not littering and what boats can do when they're on the water. So we were actually quite surprised at how the very tiny amount of litter that we actually saw, and how careful people were to pick up anything that was floating in the ocean. It was a real eye-opener for what we should be doing here. This is the conservation area just inside town, and they have museums based on Charles Darwin's work. He was only on the islands 5 weeks, and he was 22 years old at the time, which is absolutely remarkable. But he was able to really get enough information that it helped him come up with his theories of evolution and natural selection. And natural selection really is what the Galapagos Islands are all about. He also was interested in the geology of atolls and island arcs and so on. So that was quite fascinating. Anyway, so we went to the Darwin Research Center and we poked around there for a little bit. But the funny thing was that there was no mention of the fact that 2009 was the 200th anniversary of his birth, that it was the 150th anniversary of the publication of The Origin of Species, or that it was the 50th anniversary of the establishment of Galapagos Islands National Park. Those were not even mentioned, which is fascinating, because here in North America, that would be the first thing.
We're all about anniversaries.
All about anniversaries, yes. There it was just normal. Anyway, in town, there you come across things like an avenue named after Charles Darwin, a shop named after evolution. It's all quite fascinating how people are trying to capitalize on it, but really the islands do revolve around this theme. This is a poison plant that you find on the beaches there, manchineel. It's in the Euphorbia family, the poinsettia, the family that poinsettia is in, and it has a milky juice that causes quite nasty blistering. And here's a member of the bean family that's used as a fish poison. The seeds are apparently ground up and put in water as a fish poison. Pisidia probably does actually mean fish killer. Right, okay. And up in the trees, there are mockingbirds. Everywhere you look, there are mockingbirds. Each island has a slightly different subspecies, or most islands. And I could not really tell them apart, but they're like our gray jays. As soon as you stop moving, there's a mockingbird beside you looking for something to eat. This is an example of one of the low islands, the older islands that are farther away from the hotspot. And you can see how it's pretty flat and covered in a little bit of bushes, but mostly cactus forest. There's not very much greenery. It's pretty rough and dry and not very lush looking if you were trying to make a meal out of it. The main plants here are the Opuntia cactus, this big prickly pear cactus, and then that low red sesuvium that's covering the ground, green to red. It changes color. These two really make up the most important growth on most of these dry islands. And you can see that there's a sort of a browse line underneath those cacti where the pads have gone. There are no pads or fruit or anything hanging down past a certain height. And that's because if there were tortoises on this island, which there aren't, they would be eating those pads and fruit. But here it's the, we're talking about the iguanas, the land iguanas that actually reach up and grab the fruit up. And they're eating this kind of pad. This is a modified stem, these big rounded pads on the Opuntia, and the leaves, which would be little tiny fleshy nubs that fall off after a month or two. The leaves, there'll be a leaf where each of those clumps of spines are. So the spines come out where the leaves have fallen off. And somehow these iguanas are able to survive on a meal of this kind of vegetation. The stems are, the trunks that look round are actually just modified flat stems that flesh out and become more and more cylindrical with age. And you can see there are little dimples along this trunk, and that's where the areoles, those where the leaves used to be attached. We'll take another look at this one. You see the little dimples. Each of those corresponds to one of those clusters of spines on the pad that we looked at earlier. This is just a pad that's grown up. And it doesn't really have a bark like a tree would have. It has a corky layer to give it a bit of protection. It can't lose as much water because the cork keeps the water inside the trunk. So here again, one of the pads with a bunch of fruit, with flowers, sorry, around the rim. A whole series of flowers, and then occasionally we see a few fruit on them. But these are the main foods for the iguanas and the tortoises on these islands. The land iguanas, yes, exactly, land iguanas, yeah. It doesn't look very appetizing to me, but you can see the iguana there. And in fact, there's a lava lizard sitting on the iguana, waiting for an insect to be stirred up. The iguana is probably waiting for fruit to fall. You can see the fruit up on the upper part of the cactus stems, right at the very top, where the flowers have died back and the flower bases have started to swell into fruit. And this is what it looks like when one of these cacti falls down. The whole trunk is almost solid water. There's very little, there's no woody material in there. A little bit of fibrous vascular tissue, and then the corky bark on the outside. So once the plant dies and keels over, it just goes to mush. The water is released. You end up with a dry husk, and then these short fleshy roots. The plants are not terribly well anchored because the roots aren't deep as they would be with a regular tree. So this is the forest that covers these little islands. Here's one of the bushes that I was talking about earlier that's loaded with lichens that are getting their moisture mostly from fog coming off the water. Another plant that you see quite frequently is this one called espino. It is, as its name says, very spiny. It's in the buckthorn family. So similar to the buckthorn that we find in our bogs around here. And it has black berries when in season. But all we ever got to see were these really, really nasty thorns. It's a very unfriendly plant. That red sesuvium we talked about earlier is one of the main foods for animals on the island. It covers the ground. It's in the same family we talked about earlier, the Isoaceae, or it used to be called the Mesembryanthecae. The ice plant family that usually has very fleshy leaves and sometimes fleshy stems. And here, because it is so tolerant of drought, it can store so much water in those fleshy leaves, it can last between rainfalls much better than most other plants, and just carpets the ground. It's spectacular because of the colors that it turns. It's almost like our maples in the fall. Back to lichens on some of the branches again. This is the commonest of the branch lichens, and it was in most of these dry island forests. Here we're on one of the in one of the moister parts of an island, and just looking at some of the cacti there. This candelabrum cactus is endemic. It's only found in the Galapagos, and it can get to about 20 feet high. It's a really quite spectacular plant. This is not. This is a little euphorbia. We talked about the euphorb family when we were talking about the one with the toxic latex. This whole plant is only about 3-4 centimeters tall. It's microscopic and very tiny bullseye flowers on it. We only ever found the one, unfortunately. You can see the jumbled lava that the islands are made of underneath all of this. It's not much of a soil. The lava does break down and form little pockets of soil, but really there's no continuous soil cover anywhere, just little accumulations of loose material. I really can't tell you very much about this one, other than I've never even heard of the family before. Sima rubaceae. It's a very peculiar looking thing with tiny flowers that I thought was a euphorbia at one point, but nope, there we go. A very spiny acacia is quite common. I think we talked about the Palo Santo. We had the Palo Santo earlier. It's quite common, but unfortunately, I really can't tell you very much about it. Palo Verde, on the other hand, is very common there. And it's also got a peculiar growth habit. It has these zigzag main branches with rather nasty thorns on it. And then it puts out what I guess are flattened side branches. They're not modified compound leaves. They do seem to be flattened side branches with tiny leaflets all down the side. And then very flashy, showy flowers. Quite a beautiful plant, but I don't know much else about it, unfortunately. It's in the bean family. Crotons, so again, another euphorbia with potentially toxic juice. Back to the Burzynski again, yellow cordia or muyuyu. The Burzynski is very diverse on these islands, ranging from tiny little plants to quite good-sized bushes. Galapagos cotton, so in the hibiscus family. I was talking about how the stems of these Opuntia cacti grow from flat lobes. You can see the one right in front of Anne is just a series of pads stacked one on top of the other, on top of the other. And eventually the lower pads become corky and cylindrical. And that's how they eventually grow the stems that allow them to escape all the predaceous tortoises and lizards. So we'll move through here a little bit fast. Oh, here again, these incredible trunks, these water-filled trunks, water reservoirs, really is what they are. We'll go past the flowers. When any of these leaves die, this is all that's left. The water, the skin falls off, the water evaporates, and what's left is just a framework, almost like a mesh of vascular tissue. It's beautiful to look at, but totally inedible as far as the animals are concerned. Some very large grasshoppers that fly up when you get close to them, very beautiful metallic blue. A massive carpenter bee, almost black, but deep, deep metallic blue as well. More of these insect traps to try to catch the invasive wasps. Now we're going to talk a little about other invertebrates. On the beach, you find little crabs that roll up balls and feed on the material that's in those balls and spit them out and go on for another little bit of sand. But then you also find these big Sally Lightfoot crabs. These ones live most of the time on land. They just duck into the water to get away from people. And even then, they don't mind you getting pretty close to them. They're incredibly colorful and quite fascinating characters. But again, there's not much more I can say about them other than they're one of the most beautiful crabs I've ever seen. A lot of the time on the island at noon, we have a meal and then we jump into the water because the underwater parts of the island are as fascinating to explore as the above ground parts. And there are all sorts of interesting fish. They call this one gringo because it goes red, almost like people, Europeans do in the sun, I guess. It's a very peculiar pinky red colored fish. And very often you see this riding close to shore. In fact, at one point, we were told to get out of the boat and get in and take a look at them. These are sharks snoozing in the shallows, and they're mostly black tip and white tip reef sharks, and they're sort of dead asleep during the course of the day, and even with little seals plopping into the water in front of them, they don't pay any attention. They're night-feeding, fish-eating sharks. So being told to step out of a boat and into the water with this was a bit of a shock, but it actually was quite fascinating. You do see sharks beside the boat very frequently. And every time we went swimming, we'd see sharks somewhere in the water. But apparently, this is what we're told anyway, apparently there's never been an unprovoked shark attack on a person in the Galapagos. And at this place, in particular, that's very unusual. This is called Devil's Crown. It's a caldera, just the tip of a sunken volcano. And boat trips go there, you get out and you swim around the island, you swim into the middle of the caldera, the hollow center. And this is a place where at certain times of the year, hundreds of hammerhead sharks congregate to mate. We didn't see hammerheads, but we did see other sharks in the deeper water. And I think we came back with the same number of people as we left with. You do have to watch a step though, if not so much for the sharks, certainly for other things. When you're in sandy water like this, you're told to always shuffle your feet, never to step forward. And you shuffle your feet because of this. As the water sloshes back and forth, you don't see very much, but as soon as it goes a bit further, the stingrays sitting in the shallows, feeding on little shrimps and things like that. If you step on one of these, you get an incredibly painful spine driven into your leg. So you do have to pay attention when you're down there. We also got to see rays a couple of times. I actually got to swim with about 20 of them at one point, and that was sort of the highlight for me of the trip. Unfortunately, it was the day after my underwater camera had died. So that was a terrible disappointment. We got to swim with marine iguanas. This isn't my photograph, but it's a beautiful shot showing how they feed. They go underwater and they feed on these small green algae that coat the rocks, and they have to just cling to them and rip out little chunks of these green algae, and that's their main food. This is Anne watching one that's just heading back inshore, and you can see the Sally Lightfoot crabs on the orange ones in the very background, just going along the shore themselves. And these iguanas are amazing underwater, but they can only stay underwater a short time because they're cold-blooded. Their body cools to the same temperature as the water. And the longer they're in, the cooler they get and the worse their ability to move their muscles becomes. So they have to go in there, grab some food, get back out, and then lie in the sun long enough to warm the core up that they can actually start moving again, and so that they can digest their food. If the weather changes and it gets cold, they can starve to death. We also got to swim with a couple of penguins, and when they shoot by, all you see is this dart, this black dart going by, and then a stream of bubbles as the air is forced out between the feathers. Amazing underwater. Undersea, like I say, there's all sorts of life, and it's absolutely fascinating. A wide variety of fish, from the surgeonfish, schools of surgeonfishes, little rainbow wrasses that are probably cleaning them, anglerfish, parrotfish, amazing amount of wildlife. A lot of these are feeding on shellfish and corals and things like that, and that's where the sand on the beach is coming from. A juvenile hogfish, and schools of small fish that I couldn't even identify. Some of them are, they're just too many to figure out what they are. And some sharks. Like I say, every trip we got to see sharks. Lots of other invertebrates, these beautiful corals, solitary or slightly colonial corals. Sea urchins of various sorts, and sea turtles underwater. You get to see them feeding and moving around. Absolutely graceful, beautiful animals. Less graceful at the surface. This is a stack of 3 trying to mate at the surface, and one look around, I guess. On the beaches, you'll often see what looks like tank tracks, but that's where the turtles have been going in to lay their eggs. You can see how they move their flippers back and forth to move up the beach. You can see the huge hollows they've dug to deposit the eggs. And then you can see all sorts of little tracks where small lizards were running back and forth looking for insects on the beach afterwards. There's a group going down, walking on one of these trails. And as I said, the sand is composed almost entirely of broken seashells and coral, most of the white material, and little pieces of obsidian, of volcanic glass. That's the black material. There are smaller lizards on the islands, these little lava lizards. And this species, the female, is the most colorful. There's the male of the same species. And there's one of them in relation to the marine iguana. They're way, way smaller. The females of most species tend to be gray and slightly smaller than the males. This is a cluster of females on Hispaniola Island. And there are the males of the Hispaniola marine iguana. They're very colorful. Again, surrounded by Sally Lightfoot crabs looking for something to eat. And here they're warming themselves to try to digest the food that they got when they were in the water. They'll also very frequently snort. It's like they're sneezing violently and very messily, and sprays of material come out of their nostrils. Darwin hated these things. He really, really did not like them at all. He thought they looked ugly and thuggish, and he had no respect for them whatsoever. And part of that may have been the fact they were sneezing all over him every time he went near them. But the reason they're sneezing is that the glands that remove the salt from their bodies, and they ingest a lot of salt with the seaweed they eat and the water they're in, they had to get that salt out, and the glands that remove them are inside their nostrils. And so they have to actually forcibly blow that concentrated salt out through their nostrils to get it out of their bodies. So it's not quite as disgusting as it looks, but it is very strange to watch. Amblyrinchus, something knows. Amblyrinchus, yes. Mm-hmm. I think they're quite elegant in some weird dinosaurian way. El Nino is death on these animals. El Nino events occur about every 7 years, and that forces the cold Humboldt current away from the Galapagos. And that means that the water around the islands warms up, and these green algae that they feed on are replaced by brown algae that are actually toxic to them. So on average, about 90% of the population of marine iguanas is killed off every 7 years by an El Nino event. The same goes for animals on land because the precipitation changes. There's less rain on land. The land becomes hotter and drier. Plants don't flower. Plants don't produce seeds. If the seeds aren't available, the Darwin's finches don't have much food, and only the ones with the beaks that allow them to pick away at the insides of plant tissue, the very woodpecker-like beaks, or beaks that are really heavy and can break the very large seeds that no other birds can get at. Those are the only ones that will survive. The same thing happens with the seals. The seals are forced to move, and the nesting boobies, they're forced to move further and further to find the cold waters where the fish that they live on can be found. That means that they can't get back in time to feed the young. The young either don't get born or they starve very shortly after. So El Nino events are horrific on the Galapagos, but it's exactly that 7-year or so cycle of El Nino events that drives the high-speed evolution that has been occurring over the last 5 million years on the Galapagos Islands. It wipes out 90% of the population. Only the fittest animals, those most able to survive when there's no food, or when the temperature has changed, or when the precipitation has changed, those are the only ones that survive. Everything else gets cleared off the board, and then they can live and have young for the next 7 years, and then there's another event, and bammo, 90% of the population or so gets wiped out again and again and again, and that weeds out these populations so efficiently that it actually speeds up the rate at which evolution seems to occur on the islands. You can see the actual changes almost within a human lifetime in some cases, which is pretty fascinating. Here's a land iguana, again, waiting for some fruit to fall or a leaf to fall from the tree so he has something to eat. They're just sitting up there, not a breeze is stirring, nothing's coming down. And remember, if the leaf comes down, he still has to chew his way through those spines somehow. And just to show you what's going on, here are 5 land iguanas waiting for fruit. And you can see where they've reached up and they've eaten the lower parts of the pads, those terrible spiky pads. That's what they have to feed on. This is a good year. Think what it must be like in a bad year. Often these animals will take shelter in tunnels that they've made, or other animals and birds, for example, have made on the island. But really, there's not a lot of shelter for them. I just like the iguanas. Sorry, there are a lot of photographs of iguanas here. I'll get through them. Gotcha. Okay, that's it for iguanas, I think. Now back to the penguin. We talked about them earlier, but this Galapagos penguin is endemic to the islands. It's the northernmost of the penguins. They're very tiny. You saw in the photograph with people beside them. Where are we here? They're only, it's about 30 centimeters tall. Not massive. You can see the crab could almost take them on, but they're tremendous swimmers. They're like bullets underwater. As we said with the other animals, they also have terrible losses when the currents move away from the island, when the waters close to the island warm up. So their population fluctuates quite rapidly. And when they lose that cold water, they're in serious trouble. They're not able to function really in warm waters because they have so much padding to make them efficient in the cold. Lots of other birds that some of which live on the island all the time, others that are just passing through, like the sanderlings. We have those here, and suddenly you see sanderlings and red turnstones. Again, we have here on the island of Newfoundland, as they have down in the Galapagos. American oyster catcher, another bird that occasionally shows up here. Yellow warblers. I did not expect to see a yellow warbler down there, 1,000 kilometers off South America. But I did expect to see the Galapagos finches. These are the so-called Darwin's finches, and there are many different species, and we could not, unfortunately, separate one from another. But they all have a similar look, but most of them, but they have many different beak shapes, from very narrow, almost insect eater type beaks to very heavy finch-like beaks. And some of them will actually use cactus spines, almost like a woodpecker's beak, to poke around and get things out of holes in wood. Really quite neat little birds. And if you're at the airport has no windows around the waiting area, so the birds fly in and out. You're sitting there waiting for a plane, and the Galapagos finches are in the room with you. It's really quite amazing. This one probably has a nest deep in the trunk of this cactus. And here's a nest that's been built among the pads on a pontier as well. As we said, lots of different beak shapes to try to take advantage of the meager amount of food that is available on the island. And that's a whole fascinating story in itself. The Galapagos mockingbirds, as we said, act almost like gray jays, and they show up whenever you're sitting anywhere. They come around in the hopes that there's something interesting there, or that something will die near you, or something like that. Here's one taking a ride in the back of an iguana. They all seem to coexist very, very easily. The Galapagos dove is a tiny dove. It doesn't fly very frequently, but it mostly runs around in the underbrush. Beautiful blue eye ring. A very tiny dove. An endemic flycatcher. This one was feeding in the rack zone on the beach. It was picking up pieces of seaweed to see what was underneath them. And here's another one that has occasionally shown up in Newfoundland, the vermilion flycatcher. Bit more at home there than here. This is a fascinating bird, a swallow-tailed gull. It's a night-flying gull. They call it near endemic because the bulk of the population is in the Galapagos, but it also shows up in one other island chain. It's a small gull that during the day sits on the nest and just takes it easy, and then goes out at night in the dark to fish. The eyes are huge in relation to the rest of the body. Brown noddies, a tern in one of the brackish areas on the island near the mangroves. Black-crowned night heron, lava heron, waiting for a small fish to move in a pond under a rock. Birds everywhere. That's one of the great things about the islands. There's life pretty well everywhere you look. Figuring out what it is sometimes is a bit harder. On Floriana, there is a large salt pan. It's a lake that dries out almost completely, which means that any shrimp or little fish get concentrated in one end. And it's where the flamingos come and have and nest. And there are, I think it was 2 different species of flamingos that show up, but the great flamingo is the usual one that's usually seen. This is one that was just wandering down a beach. Allowed us to get a little bit of a close look at it. Quite a neat young animal. And as with almost all the animals on the Galapagos, even the nesting birds are not concerned by the presence of people. Blue-footed boobies are close relatives of gannets, about the same size. But in the Galapagos, you can wander through the booby colony, get a close look at them. You mustn't touch them, of course, but you can walk within a couple of feet of them and do close-up shots of them and take a look at their chicks, and they're totally unconcerned and unprotective. They're not looking at you. They're just looking at the scenery and watching everything, watching the world go by. They are totally unconcerned. This is the second kind. That was the blue-footed booby. This is the Nazca booby. There's a photograph here with people right beside a Nazca booby. Oh, this is to remind people of what it's like with the gannet colony at Cape St. Mary's. You can look at them from a distance, but if you were there, they'd be off in a flash. This is what it's like in a booby colony in on the Galapagos. You stand up, you go close to them, they look at you, you look at them. They are totally unaggressive. They're not jabbing at you or trying to run away. They are utterly unconcerned by your presence. It is the most peculiar thing. And here's a female, or presumed female, sitting on a nest, and there's a Galapagos brown hawk, which is really the only predator on the islands, and it's standing a couple of feet away from her, and she's barely showing any sign of concern at that. This is the thing that I don't quite understand, because presumably the brown hawk has been there long enough to be genetically different from South American brown hawks. But the birds still are not afraid of it, even though it is a predator. And this one's pretty obviously a predator. You can see the blood. And that's why I'm not sure what happened to this seal, whether it just died of old age or got smacked by a boat or what, but it was a great meal for the hawk. Another big bird you see on the islands all the time is the magnificent frigate bird. They spend most of their time on boats or beside the boats, just hanging in the air. And they're quite beautifully ugly birds. They're most peculiar things. They primarily feed on fish. The males have this peculiar pouch that they inflate and then fly around. It's like carrying a weather balloon. So they're very noticeable. And then they'll sit in a tree and make peculiar rattling noises to attract females. And then they deflate and have a snooze. Most peculiar animals. And this is what the young look like. This is a juvenile, almost comical, very, very peculiar, very beautiful birds. But when they're in flight, they just hang there in the sky. Any little bit of air movement caused by a boat moving through the water is all they need to be able to fly alongside it without flapping their wings for hours. They're just using the wind that's moving past the boat to get the lift. Very amazing birds. From the boat, you see all sorts of things. In this case, we had bottlenose dolphins that followed the boat for a while. As you said, you saw sharks and other interesting things. Now we're going to go to a seal colony and take a quick look at a sea lion colony. Sorry, I always do that. Yes. This is the Galapagos sea lion. Very good. And they, as we said before, are unconcerned by people. They've been moving up and down this beach long enough that they've actually polished the rocks almost to a silky consistency. Here are some juveniles playing, little pups playing in the water. As we walked along the beach, they came and they played around our ankles like puppies would or kittens would. They were quite fascinated to see people. And this is how excited the adults got that their kids were playing with people on the beach. They just stayed there snoozing and paying very little attention to the whole thing because it was a lovely warm day. This is rather peculiar. The seals were sunbathing, we were in the water, but that's the way it is in the Galapagos. It's kind of a topsy-turvy world. If you sit on a beach, often the seals will come up and sit beside you. They're social animals. And if they see someone or something there, they'll go up and take advantage of it, and lie down and have a snooze. And as long as you don't touch them or molest them, you're all right. It's a nursing calf, a nursing pup. Whew, that's better, yeah. And sometimes they'll even take shelter under bushes and things like that if it's looks like it's this doesn't look like a particularly hot day, but they do seem to like to be under things. The males are quite a bit larger than the females. They can get up to 400 kilograms and actually can be very protective. There are cases where people have been pushed around by these big males when they're in the water, bumped into at high speed, just because they got a bit too close to one of the females. So you do have to keep your eye on the males, but the females are totally friendly underwater. They have a great affinity for boats. In any of the harbors, whenever a boat's tied up, seals jump out of the water. Sea lions. Whenever I say seals, I mean sea lions. They leap into the boat and then snooze. That's okay if you've got some of the smaller females, but when you've got a couple of 800-pound 800-pound males in there, that's a serious problem for some boats. And it's not so much the animals being there as the mess they leave. They tend to defecate in the boats, and I guess the fishermen really don't appreciate that. So sometimes they put wires around the boats and things to try to stop them, but it doesn't really work. Underwater, they're incredibly inquisitive. They love to come up and stare into your mask when you're skin diving. They zip around you and make you feel very slow and sluggish when you're in the water. They're absolutely beautiful to watch, and they're very playful. They spend most of the time just observing you when they're nearby. We're coming close to the end of our trip. This is Bartholomew Island. These are some of the lava flows where the top of the lava tubes have collapsed. These are just little tiny ones, not the big ones that we were in. But you can see the idea where the lava has solidified at the top and then flowed out and left the hollow tube. And here they also have lots of pumice where the rock was ejected with a lot of gas bubbles in it. And as it was ejected, the pressure was reduced, the gas bubbles expanded, and you end up with this very light rock. You can take big chunks of it and hold it. This only weighs a couple of pounds. It's quite peculiar stuff to play with. A lot of it will float because it's got so many gas holes in it. And we're back to the Boraginaceae with the Dachylia, which is this peculiar silvery plant that likes even something as dry as a lava field in the middle of a almost parched, barren island. I cannot get over how some of these plants survive in these kinds of soils. There's an endemic cactus, the lava cactus, very beautiful, prickly little cactus that can get up to about 1 meter high. This is the site that was used in the Captain Commander movie for one of the scenes. It's a sort of a iconic Galapagos Island scene. Very beautiful, clear blue waters offshore. This is a couple of mini calderas up the side of the main volcano. And what else can we find? But from there, we go back to the bus and we go back to reality. That's our trip through the Galapagos. There are lots and lots of books written about the Galapagos by people, even such as Herman Melville and Kurt Vonnegut and so on. There's a lot of stuff out there. A lot of it is absolutely fascinating. And if you haven't been there, I highly recommend it as a place to get to. I would go back in a flash if I could. It was such a wonderful trip. If you have any questions, this is a good time to ask them. Good evening.
Well, Michael, that was wonderful. I think everybody is dumbstruck by the variety of plants and animals and geology and water, fish, and it's just fantastic. Thank you so much. Wow.
And kept me almost on time this time.
That was great. I kept thinking to myself, boy, Charles Darwin would have been so jealous if he had seen your camera and what you did with it.
Wouldn't the camera have helped? Yeah, my goodness.
Yeah, just can you imagine? Yeah.
Michael, I have to disagree with Darwin on your iguanas. I thought they're absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree.
And they look really wise. Don't they look really wise? They know it all. I wanted to mention the plant that I really liked. It was the Palo Verde.
Oh, yes.
Have you ever seen that before? You've gone to so many places. Was that new to you?
That one was new. That for us, yeah, absolutely new. Yeah.
That was just gorgeous. I wanted to ask you one more thing. The food fishery, because the waters are so protected, you know, is there a good food fishery there? Do you see a lot of fish to eat and stuff?
Fish are available to eat, but that is one of the places where there is conflict between the national park and the local population. There are a couple of places, and certainly that's one of the most difficult ones. In fact, the fishermen have on times staged blockades and threatened to damage animals and so on, and get herd more, so they could have higher quotas and so on. That's one of those balancing acts where the government of Ecuador really has to work very closely with the local fishermen to try to make sure that they can exist and that they don't, by the work that they're doing, harm the park itself. The other place that's really tricky is farming and domestic animals. Cats, rats, pigs, goats, all of those kinds of things are on many of the islands and have become a real problem. They, I think, finally eradicated goats on one of the islands in the Galapagos. And the goats were put there originally to try to provide food for stranded sailors, in the same way that the tortoises were taken by sailors, so they would have a live meat supply that would last for months.
Well, sailing back to Europe,
yes,
or to wherever they were sailing back to.
But in many places around the world, goats were dropped off, and pigs in some places, to provide wild food that could take care of itself, that people could then harvest if they got stuck on those islands and need to find something. So, good idea, bad consequences. They spread. They eat the food that the local animals would normally consume. The juveniles of the tortoises eat the eggs of the tortoises and the iguanas. So that's a huge problem too. Trying to get rid of that, trying to get people not to have as many cats and dogs and goats and so on, and certainly not to let them free. So yes, it is a huge balancing act.
Thank you.
Well, I really enjoyed all of it, but I love the iguanas. Thank you.
Very good, very good. Someone suggested that the iguanas might be the original model for Godzilla. It's got the right kind of face, hasn't it?
I have a question. How did the tortoises originally get to the islands? They're so far from the mainland.
Everyone would like to know that. The best guess is that they rafted there. After the Japanese tsunami some years back, vast quantities of material arrived on the coast of British Columbia, all the way from Japan, including crates full of motorcycles and things like that, but also chunks of wood and rafts with all sorts of wildlife and plants attached. So animals can cross, and plants can cross large expanses of water after a sufficiently catastrophic event. And certainly around the Ring of Fire, tsunamis, earthquakes, and things like that happen quite frequently. And it's not inconceivable for material in large quantities to be released from the coasts of some of the South America, for example, which is where other large tortoises still exist, and iguanas certainly are native to there. For that material to come across the ocean, and it's all kind of a statistical risk. If you drop enough things into the water, all you need is a couple of them to arrive at some point down the line. If you do it long enough and frequently enough, chances are you could get something all the way out to the Galapagos Islands just based on chance. That seems to be the best guess at this point.
Yeah. Well, I thought genetically the iguanas were
very closely related.
To South American iguanas. And they would not have swum that distance because of the cold water, right? The Humboldt current.
They had to be on something. They couldn't get there. The same with the tortoises. They will float and they can live and stay in water for a while, but they could never get that far in the water. And they probably wouldn't have got there as large tortoises. They probably would have come as small ones that rafted across somehow. And considering the size of some logs in tropical countries, you could have all sorts of things in a raft of material from a flood or tsunami or something. Just think of the possibilities. It's 1,000 kilometers.
Michael, is there any idea of how long they've been there? Do they have any genetic way of figuring out if it's 5 million years or 10 or way less?
Well, the islands have only been there for 5 million years. So it's less than 5 million. But I'm sure that there is people who could look at the DNA and get estimate how long they've been separated from the mainland relatives. I don't actually know any of those numbers, unfortunately.
Of course, there's a complication. Of course, they had to not just get there; they had to get to almost all of the islands as well within that group.
Yes, and there, what it looks like is that all you need to do is colonize one island, and if you have enough of a population and enough events, that island can then send off a few animals to colonize another nearby island, and then that island will colonize the next island over. And that seems to be the way that many of these colonizations have occurred. It doesn't have to be bulk colonization of all the islands at once. All you need to do is get a couple of breeding pair or a pregnant animal to one of the islands and give it enough time and circumstances for the other islands nearby to be colonized.
Sort of like people.
Very much like people. Yeah.
Michael, can I ask you, you only showed a couple of pictures of insects.
Yes.
Are there very many insects like we have mosquitoes and ticks and crazy kind of biting insects? Is there anything like that down there?
We didn't see anything that bit or stung, well, sharks, but nothing on land that was biting or causing problems. I don't remember anything that was unpleasant. It may well be that at certain times of year they have problems, but when we were there, which was January, there was absolutely nothing. We were wandering around in fields, we were wandering around in deserts, we were in the water. No, nothing unpleasant that we came across.
No land snails or anything like that?
Actually didn't see any snails. I would have photographed them, but no, just marine snails, no land snails at all. I'm sure they're there. We just didn't get the chance to see them, I guess.
Yeah.
Mostly because most of the islands we were on were very dry. The only place we saw freshwater puddles was where we saw the giant tortoises.
On Christabel.
And we were oohing and eyeing so much over the giant tortoises, I actually could have walked through 100 snails and not noticed them. So I'm sorry.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, those tortoises, that really was amazing.
Yeah. So Santa Cruz and San Cristobal probably have the largest human populations. And they're the ones that had the agricultural fields. Yes. They're two of the older islands, so the rock has broken down more.
So it's actually
so if you were going to find snails or other insects or whatever, they would be most likely around there. And we weren't necessarily, I mean, we were there, but we didn't necessarily spend all of our time there.
Yeah. Right.
So you're right. We may just not have seen that side of things.
It was an unfortunate oversight, John. Sorry.
There you go. You have to go back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess everybody is just trying to think of all the wonderful things that we've seen tonight. There have been so many, and such a great.
I think what surprised us was, I mean, I think the tortoises are what you hear about, but everything was amazing
Absolutely.
and like classic cases of, you know, of evolution and adaptation and isolation. And in some ways, the ecosystems are very
simple.
They're very simple. So the cause and effects are quite visible, quite dramatic. Exactly. But then the other thing is that, you know, the land is fascinating, the geology is fascinating, the underwater part was fascinating. I mean, all the elements were. So it really, it's one of those places that you're totally, we were totally blown away by it. And it, you know, absolutely lived up to, I mean, it exceeded any expectations that we had. And we were with a fairly small group. Yes. I mean, we were 12 people on that boat. We went with, it was a Canadian company, it used to be called Gap Adventures, now it's called G Adventures. And they continue to offer trips to the Galapagos. But there are many, when we went to the harbor there were, we were told there were like 90 different boats at the time in 2009. Most of those are small boats, but I mean, there are big cruise ships that go there too. They just can't, you know, get as close to the island. So anybody who is planning to go, I would say, do your homework and choose the small, locally staffed boats, if you know, if at all possible, and yeah, and ones that have naturalists on board. I mean, they do require part of the management, exactly, part of the management of the marine park and the national park is to make sure that there are guides / guards yes. with you,
and they're very competent. I was really quite impressed.
Yeah. So if you missed your boat by chance and you had to spend the night there by chance, what would you eat?
You wouldn't. You could not miss the boat. The boat cannot.
No, I know you couldn't miss the boat, but if you did, what would you eat if you had to spend a night there and you needed to eat something?
You wouldn't. You'd wait until morning. You're not allowed to touch the plants or the animals.
No.
Oh, yeah, okay. You'd probably go hungry for that person. Yeah. But again,
one night.
Yeah, the communities on, well, 2 of the islands plus Isabella, Floriana. Yeah, I think there's like 5 or 6 that actually have that have communities on them. Yeah. So you can actually go to those communities and stay, and you can go to a coffee shop and, you know, a big restaurant.
But on the other islands, you're right. There is nothing. And not only that, but when you go ashore, you're not allowed to bring food with you. You can't even put a snack in your pocket.
Yeah, you didn't even bring snacks
because
with you.
You might be tempted to feed it to the animals, and then that becomes an offense under the.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I guess a better question would be what would Darwin have eaten if he got stuck on an island for the night?
Excellent question. They at that point they were shooting anything that moved, right? So I don't think that would have been.
I guess the simple nature of the communities of animals and plants is a result of just what didn't get there.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, not so much that there's anything inherently simple. It's just that a lot of stuff just never got there. Yeah.
And you're right. There. When you start looking at the actual number of species of plants and number of species of animals, it is very small compared to the nearby, the 1,000-kilometer away mainland. It's a very tiny subsample of that, and all the animals that are there have to make do with whatever food source is available, and if it doesn't happen to suit them, they're toast. They're not going to make it, unfortunately. It is quite amazing. The only thing that I regret about the entire trip, the only thing that really, really hurt me was my camera dying. My underwater camera. That was so annoying. The first day, I somehow or other water got into it, and that was the end of it. Bring 2 underwater cameras if you go.
I just wanted to add some of the human factors. the research laboratories there, I don't know if you were in them, but they have approximately 200 scientists living there all time. They often are on rotation. The other thing that really surprised me is Sanibel, I think it is, but I may be wrong. It's the playground of the Peruvians. Sorry. Ecuadorians, sorry, the Ecuadorians. I counted approximately 20 bars on the beach of one of the islands. So it's not exactly a, I came and I thought it was, very much an absolute wilderness area, but no, it's very much a popular area for the Ecuadorians.
Wow, but you know, I mean, to travel out 1,000 kilometers, I mean, you'd either have to have your own yacht, or you'd go by air, you'd fly out. So
or you raft.
No, but I mean, I can see what you mean. Like it's not something the ordinary farmer is going to do, or the ordinary fisherman is going to do. It would definitely be, kind of an elite class thing too.
It's a playground of the rich and famous. It would be the way to put it.
I wonder, that might have been San Cristobal.
Pardon me?
Would that have been on San Cristobal?
Yeah, I think that's the one where I counted the bars and the rest. That it's not a negative. It just surprised me.
Yeah. Well, I was surprised that so many people lived there on Santa Cruz,
I think
which is even more populous. But what was weird was watching things being brought in, like barges loaded with school desks to supply the schools, right? I mean, so like because they're islands like that, everything has to be brought in. But the flip side of that is that anything that is garbage either has to go out or has to be accommodated on the island. And that was, they were really trying hard to manage that whole garbage problem.
And this was in 2009 that we were there, and tourism has increased considerably since that time. So it would be very interesting to know what some of the solutions are, or whether they've actually come up with any solutions for these problems.
Yeah, they do desalination of water, right? That's one of the things they have to do to have enough fresh water. So there's for the local population, there's all kinds of challenges inherent with living out in a place.
Were they already inhabited when Darwin was there?
Yes, there were a small number of people in Darwin's time. I think that, hang on.
That's 200 years ago, 225 years ago.
It seems to me that there were people living even back then, small numbers of people. I don't know whether they were fishermen or what they were doing, but it seems to me that there were people there. I'd have to read The Voyage of the Beagle again or something like that.
Yeah.
No, that's a very interesting question. How would we? No, we'd have to read.
Did you see any octopus in the water?
No, not at all. No cephalopods of any sort. That would have been quite fun, but no.
I was actually surprised at how warm the water was, but I gather January is a warmer time. I mean, it's not tropical. That's the thing. It's warm, but it's not tropical.
And it's not seasonal, really.
Yeah,
in the same way that it is here.
But people who go there in the summer say they almost needed to wear like wetsuits if they were going swimming, right?
Yes.
So I don't know if that makes it like June, July, which would be our summer, but that's when the Humboldt
current is closer into
to the islands,
which would be when the animals are
and it's a cold current, right? It's a current that comes from the Antarctic, so it's kind of like the Labrador current. If you think about how the Labrador current comes down the coast of Newfoundland
and warms St. John's.
So you don't go swimming off St. John's, right? Whereas you could go swimming off the west coast of Newfoundland.
Beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. For someone who had camera trouble, you did a wonderful job. It's fantastic, all the pictures.
Always carry a spare.
Yes.
Yeah, we have the land camera.
Yeah,
The land
yeah.
camera was fine, but the underwater camera is the one that kicked the bucket on you.
Sadly.
Well, if there are no more questions, I guess we should just say thank you again. And well,
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. It was good.
Thank
It
you.
was good
Good night,
for us to
everyone.
relive it.
Fabulous.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Probably be back
Bye.
Zooming in the fall.
Oh, yes. Do take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take
Okay,
care.
good night, everybody.
Thanks, Karen.
Good
Yep.
night.
Thanks a lot.